the value added. Oh, hi, everyone. This is the value added producer grant writing tips webinar. It's an annual webinar, so this is 2022 that we're recording this webinar. And I love hosting this webinar every year because I am really, really passionate about this grant. I've seen it do wonderful things for my clients who have gotten funded. So I'm happy to do this again. This year, we have a short application window, so we're really going to dive in today and dig into a lot of different details so that you can tell, is this the right grant for you, and how can you move forward to get funded this year? So what we're going to cover today is, first I'm going to give you a little bit of an intro about me so that you know who I am and why I think I know anything about this grant. Then we'll go over general eligibility, how the grant works. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to pepper in real world examples of how my clients have used this grant to grow their farm brands. I think that's really important because it helps you imagine what this can do for your own farm. And then my top advice for how to approach the application. That includes time-saving tips, mistakes to avoid. I've been writing this grant since 2017, so there's a ton I've learned about what to do and what not to do, just to make the process easier on you. And the workflow I use to create winning applications. So I've written 14 of these applications so far. They've all gotten funded. And so there's a workflow I use and that I use in my mentorship program that I'm going to show you today. There is time for question and answer. So as they come up in your brain, feel free to stick them in the chat. Liz is here today. I didn't intro her, but Liz is going to be collecting those so that when we get to Q&A, we can easily get through those. What this webinar isn't is really like, I'm not going to be giving you all the links to the toolkits because all of that really is available on the USDA RD's website. So Liz is going to drop into the chat right now too, that link in case you want the USDA RD material. That's who has released this grant. And if you just go online and search USDA RD VAPG, just so many acronyms, you'll find that material as well. So a little bit about me. So I'm the founder of Ellen Raleigh Creative and Strategy. I'm calling right now from Petaluma, California, where I live on a nice piece of property and have a beautiful garden. I don't farm anymore. I don't know if, yeah, there are periods that I'd say I urban farmed for a time, and then I was more of a garden grower. So the way that I got to farming is originally in about 2003, I got really interested in farming when I was abroad living in Thailand. I had the opportunity to live with Thai rice farmers and see firsthand how different it was when farmers had the ability to sell their product directly to customers versus the farmers who are caught in kind of this hamster wheel of selling to middlemen who sold to rice mills, who sold to exporters, who sold on the global market, and how that led to a lot of poverty, where rice farmers that were able to sell directly were able to set prices that kept their businesses profitable. When I came back to the United States, I started working in urban farms in San Francisco, and so really got to know the farming community here in California and realized that so many of the issues, while they were worlds apart, a small Thai rice farmer is way smaller scale than any small scale farmer in the United States. While they were like worlds apart, so many of the issues were the same. And through all of that, I ended up working at an olive oil ranch in Petaluma who wanted to launch a jam line. I naively thought just because I knew how to make jam, I would know how to launch a jam line, which it turned out was not true. But along the way, I figured out all the compliance pieces and the operations pieces and the marketing and sales pieces. So when I left that job in 2016, I kind of just slowly evolved a business as people came to me and asked me to do similar projects for them. And that included writing this grant, because a lot of times, where does the money come from for that marketing, for, you know, the help in the kitchen to make your products, et cetera? Well, it can come from this grant. So as I said, I've written 14 of these grants that has equaled $800,000 in funding for small farms in 4 states. And I've had 100% success rate, which I always like to knock on a lot of wood for that one. And through getting this grant, clients have gotten products featured in places like Oprah Magazine, Food and Wine Magazine, Whole Foods, Buy Right Market, and more, because they actually have the money to invest in the type of packaging that those types of, you know, exposure want to see, the marketing campaigns, the PR campaigns, et cetera. So we're talking about the value-added producer grants. And I'm going to say VAPG a lot. That's what they call it. And it is released by the USDA-RD, which is the United States Department of Agriculture Rural Development. So there's a lot of acronyms, but just that's the main thing to know. If that's what you're looking for, you're in the right place. Before we get into the eligibility requirements, I just want to start off with a real life example. So this is one of my clients, Oya Organic Farm. They're down in Hollister, California. And they're a small scale diversified veggie farm. And when we first started working together, they were selling at farmers markets, and they also had a small CSA, and they kind of had 2 main problems. One was that they grew tomatoes, and any of you on the call who grow tomatoes know that tomatoes have a lot of overage production, blemished produce, stuff that you really can't sell on the farmers market table. So especially in California, a lot of people dry farm, and that just makes things like blossom end rot even worse. So there's kind of a few options if you're in a situation with things like tomatoes, or this could be apples, or it could be peppers, or really any crop that has some amount of crop that you can't sell. There is the option to just let it stay on the plant. Typically that reduces your yields, because the plant is now not as lively, because it's keeping alive things that are, you know, rotting. You can pay to have people just like pick and drop it, and then you're, you know, losing some money on that labor. Or you could just have, maybe there's some of it that you could pick and sell on the wholesale market. And that's typically in California, that's $1 a pound, which is 1/3 of the cost you'd be able to sell it for at the farmer's market. So you're paying for that labor and maybe just recouping it in the sales. So they had that problem. They had all these tomatoes that were rotting, that they weren't being able to use, that they were losing money on. The other issue was that they really loved the way that their CSA was creating some stable income for them outside of just farmers market sales. But what would happen every year, again, we're in California, so I know this is different for some of you on the call, but we're able to do a CSA year round here. But what they were finding was every winter, they would lose all these customers because the boxes aren't as vibrant. And then in the spring, they'd have to go through the process of getting customers again, and then losing them again in the winter. And it's really the winter when you need that income that's going to help you pay for the seeds and pay for all of the planning of the spring. So those were the 2 problems that they were working with. So we wrote a value-added producer grant for them to create basically these value-added products, because now they could turn that those tomatoes that were being lost into products that they could actually make the same amount per pound or more by having it be a finished product. Plus, in the winter, they could have these products in their CSA boxes and keep the CSA boxes fun and exciting so that they didn't lose their membership. So the things that the grant covered: design fees, so the labels that you saw, all these marketing materials, their website, an online CSA portal build out. So CSA members could go on this website and just sign up by themselves, instead of, you know, they were like emailing all these people and it just wasn't scalable. branded CSA boxes, social media ads, a mailer campaign. So that's this middle one where the mailer, it goes out in the mail in targeted areas where their CSA dropped off, and a salary for CSA members. The project worked. They did see that they were able to start having more stability with their CSA sales. And as Marcia says, before working with Ellen to secure a value-added producer grant from the USDA, we had tomatoes rotting in the field every season. I would think about preserving them, but I didn't have the time to take on the work myself. Now that we have the grant, I'm making our value-added product line a reality and something we are proud of. One thing I'd like to add to that, it also paid for the co-packer fees. So there's someone who worked with a co-packer, and now those fees for that were being covered by grant money. So that's one example, but I just want to say there's many different ways that this grant can be used. So the clients that I've worked with, there are some that have less than $10,000 in sales to people who have more than $1 million in sales. So you don't have to come in with, you know, like, we've been selling this for 10 years and look how great we're doing. Like, there is an interest I've found from the USDRD to give some of this money to people who are starting out and need that, like, the cash to help them in those beginning phases. I've worked with people who are in year 2 of farming to multi-generational family farms, people selling through farmers markets, farm stands, CSAs, local stores, grocery, and also as an ingredient. So, like, you know, selling to people who are then going to further process it. It's not channel specific. You could be selling through all different channels and use this grant money. Processing on farm or working with co-packers, both are eligible. Selling crushed tomatoes to apple cider caramels, to dried rose petals, to grass-fed hot dogs, to organic coleslaw mix, to organic grapefruits. It's really a wide range of things that my clients have been selling and that you can get funding for under this grant. So let's talk about, like, the nuts and bolts of some of the eligibility stuff. And I'm going to take a sip of water before we do that. So value added. Value added, when I hear that word, I typically think tomatoes into tomato sauce. And that's always the example I use for some reason. It's just the one that comes to mind. So that is what they call a change in physical state. So you're growing one thing, you're growing a commodity, then you're somehow processing it so that there is now a finished product that you're selling to your final customer. So that is one way that value added is defined in this grant. To be eligible for this grant, you have to fall into one of these categories. It's only one, not all of them. So either that, which is a change in physical state, or the way it's produced enhances its value. What that means is that you are growing your crops organically, or your beef grass-fed, or your chickens are free range and selling the eggs. All of those things, that's the way that you're producing it. When you go out into the marketplace, you're actually able to charge more than if you were conventionally growing the crop. That's considered a value add because you've added value by the way you're producing the crop. Physical segregation, the example I like to use for this one is if you grow, say, oats in one field and wheat in a separate field instead of interplanting them, so that you can sell the oats as gluten-free oats. Farmer ranch-based renewable energy projects, this can be things like walnut hulls that you turn into biofuel. And then locally produced is its own category. So that one very much mimics what I was saying about the way it being produced, enhancing its value. Basically, if you're marketing yourself as local, and because of that, you're able to charge more and earn more for your product because of it, then you're considered eligible for this grant. There's a few different application types, and they're listed right here: independent producer, ag producer group, farmer or rancher cooperative, majority controlled producer-based business. The basic, like, you can go into the details on the USDA-RD site of like what all of those definitions are, but the basic gist is you have to be, or the majority of the ownership in whichever structure your farm is structured, has to be people who are involved in the day-to-day labor of the farm and the production of the value-added crop or product. So that doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be out there with your hands in the soil every day. Like if you're to the scale where you have a farm crew, but you're involved, you're the person deciding when the rotations happen and what has to happen now and hiring and firing those people and all of that, then you're still considered an independent producer. What you can't be is someone who like bought a farm, hired a farm manager and a crew, and like your day job is that you're, I don't know, a lawyer and that whole team is who's making all the decisions. That can't be what's happening. And it also can't be that you're a processor and purchasing from the people who are growing it. You have to be actually the business or the person who's involved in the growing of the crop. Okay, so that's another big one. The other main requirements is that you must own 50% or more of the raw commodity that the grant project is for. So basically, when you write this application, you're going to write it for a commodity and a product. An example would be it's for tomatoes that you're turning into tomato sauce, or it's for herbs that you are selling as, you know, organic and local. Really, the way that they want to see these is that it's limited. So you're not going to list like 12 crops and 15 products. One of my biggest pieces of advice is always to narrow your scope on what you're presenting. Now, it doesn't mean though that if you are a diversified veggie farm, that this isn't right for you. You would just hone in on which commodities are we gonna focus on for this grant and which final products, knowing that whatever you do marketing, sales wise, is gonna impact the visibility of your farm overall. So one more thing about this requirement. So say you're doing that whole tomato into tomato sauce thing. It doesn't mean that you have to grow 50% of the ingredients in the tomato sauce. You don't have to have grown the olive oil and the garlic and the oregano. You just have to grow at least 50%, or sorry, more than 50% of the tomatoes that went into the tomato sauce. Projects also must expand your customer base and they must increase the producer, your revenue. How the grant works. So there's two types of grants. There's a planning grant and a working capital grant. Planning grants really are to fund feasibility studies, marketing plans, business plans, those kinds of things. Working capital is when a project is already like, it's a working capital project is like one that you're actually selling and creating the product. Projects can run up to 3 years, and there is a one-to-one match. So your portion can come from cash. So basically, one-to-one match means if, say, it was a $100,000 project, $50,000 would be coming from the government, $50,000 would be coming from you. However, you do not need $50,000 in your bank account in cash to apply for this grant, because your portion can come from a mixture of cash, the value of the raw commodity, and that's defined by USDA AMS rates, and the value of your time can be up to 25% of the total budget. And also there's third party in kind. So how it ends up working out, it's something like getting $2 every time you spend $1, getting maybe $3 even every time you spend $1. So typically there is some cash in people's budget, but it doesn't have to be that the cash is matching the grant funding. It's just all of these categories together. There's 2 tiers of requirements. So if you're asking for less than $50,000, there's no feasibility study required. Those are the grants that I really specialize in. If you're asking for more than $50,000, I'd say this year, because it's only 2 months to get your application in, I'd say you need to have that feasibility study already written in order to ask for more than $50,000. Eligible and ineligible expenses. The main things, I won't go into all of them because there's like a bunch to talk about there. But the main things is that this does not cover the cost of farming. So it's not for tractors or seeds or harvesting labor. It's when the harvesting labor would not be eligible. The washing the produce would be eligible. The stickering of the produce would be eligible. So it's not for the farming, it's for the value add. It's also not for equipment. Some small equipment purchases under $5,000 are okay, but it's not like for building out a kitchen or building out a retail space. What are other things? I feel like there's one other that people will ask me about a bunch, but you can stick those in the questions and we can get to them later. So some 2022 specifics: paper applications are due postmarked by May 2nd. I do recommend that you go the postmarked route. The electronic applications are due beforehand through grants.gov by April 25th. There are just so many glitches with grants.gov. That's why they tell you they need to be in earlier. And to me, I'm like, why go through the headache? You can just print out your application and put it in the mail by a later date. There is some 1 to 10 match available. So this is leftover funding from COVID relief. But it's very limited what you'll do to apply if you want to apply for both. So in that case, it means instead of having to have like $50,000, if you ask for $50,000, you have to show that you have between cash and in kind $50,000. You would only have to show $5,000 of cashing in kind. It's very limited funding. They're basically gonna score the applications, start giving away the money when the COVID money is gone. If you have submitted 2 budgets, like one that's 1 to 10 and one that's 1 to 1, you could then be put in the pool for getting the bigger chunk of money, which is the 1 to 1 match. That all of that, if you come into the mentorship, we'll like map out how to do that, because I know that sounds kind of confusing. But just know there is some COVID money still available, but it's limited in how much is available. And there's also some new priority areas around COVID relief and global climate change. Like if you can weave into your application how the way you farm is helping with, say, carbon sequestration or other things that impact climate change. So I'm going to do our first stop for questions. This is a great time to ask me questions about the grant specifically, about your eligibility, about what funds can be used for, all of that kind of stuff. So I'll stop my share for a second and pop in. Awesome. So we have a question. We raise a grain-fed beef and are trying to transition into 100% grass-fed. You mentioned working with a grass-fed producer. Can you give some more examples of how to attach a value-added angle to that? So yes, so grass-fed fits into that, the way that you produce your crop enhances its value. So the way that you would prove that is showing how you're able to make more money by selling as grass-fed versus grain-fed, and how you're able to charge more money for it in the marketplace. Let me know if you have more specific questions around that. Just feel free to put them in the chat. Would solar panels be eligible? No, that wouldn't be something. There is that, I don't know if they're still doing, I'm really only very versed in this grant. I'm not like a general grant writer, but I know there was a program around solar that I don't know is there anymore. So for example, Chantal, a fry cutter for the veggies freezer to store, hold that product. So the fry cutter, if it's less than $5,000, like that could get slipped in. The freezer, if you're renting it, this is one of those like weird, the reason they don't want a lot of equipment, and this is true for most grants, is that equipment is not a big part of what they fund, is because like they don't want something that's depreciating. So for example, delivery vehicles, you can do a lease. but not a purchase. So that might be something that's possible with, say, a freezer. But the thing that I want to definitely mention is, even if, like, if you came on this call being like, there's this freezer that I want to buy, is this the grant that can do it? The answer might be no, but it's going to free up cash flow on other things that you're already spending money on, say packaging, say the ingredients, say sale, like, you know, the person who's selling for you at the farmer's market. If we free up that cash flow, then you might have the money to actually buy that freezer. Vicky, in that example, grass-fed beef, would grass seed be an eligible purchase? No, nothing related to actually the farming, the whole farming, husbandry, like the tending of the crop is not eligible. It's everything that happens after that. So with grass-fed beef, with like the client I worked with last year, it was the arbitrage fees. That word is just so fancy to me. The fees, they made like ground beef and cuts, so like the butcher fees, they were doing like home delivery, so like shipping, and they rented a freezer space. They rented like a freezer kind of that got dropped off at the farm. So that, and then like their website hosting and that farm new signage for the farmer's market, like those are the things that got covered. Fries being a frozen product, it's required to be able to store them. Yes, that doesn't mean that it's eligible for grant funding because they have their own eligibility. So like I just mentioned with that grass-fed beef client I worked with last year, they needed freezer space because they would freeze all their meat and then ship it around the country. There are these, I'm blanking on the word, they look almost like storage, like shipping containers that are freezers that you can rent from, and they come and they deliver them to your farm and you can rent them long term. That we got covered because it's a rental. They couldn't have purchased it. It's like a lease. I have a complicated question regarding labeling our beef. Can I ask it via audio? Let's see if we have time at the end. I just don't want to, we have such limited time and there's a bunch more to talk about. And also if you want to email projects@ellenraleigh.com, if it's more specific, like to you and it's kind of complicated, that might be a better way to do it. So sorry to say no, but I think that might be a better use of our time. And Liz just stuck the email that I mentioned in the chat. So the fry cutter, advertising, packaging, labeling, like a UPC codes and stuff. Exactly, Chantal. And yes, rentable is okay, leasing it. Any other questions about kind of the grant and eligibility before I go into like how to approach the grant is what we're going to go into next. Janelle and Judy, we grow our bedding plants and farm products from seed on site. We are on an island in the North Pacific and so are limited to barges and airplanes for our supplies. I love that. I just love this. I know that must be not as sweet sounding as it is, or sweet as it is sounding. We market directly at a garden center, which we're taking on this year. Can this grant cover our supply chain costs, including the planting containers and freight? Yes, because that is something, any like packaging and those things are all included. And yes, the freight would be included as part of the cost of purchasing those things. Cool. Okay, so we're going to move on to, so I'm going to reshare my screen. I love that you're, oops, no, I do not want to leave. I love that you're all kind of thinking through how this could be applicable to your farm, because there are just so many ways that it can. Okay, so guidelines. So I'm going to talk about the 5-phase approach that I use to approach this grant and that I present in the grant writing mentorship. This comes after, like I said, I've been writing this since 2017, and there was a lot of very frantic days in those early rounds of writing this application. So I'm hoping that this helps ease the process for you a bit. So the biggest thing I've learned is that you have to start with planning. So when you get a grant application, like the application, it's very natural that the first thing you want to do is start filling stuff out because it makes you feel like you're actually getting something done. But what that ends up doing is then over the process of figuring out what is actually manageable, what's going to be in your budget, you end up having to go back, find where you said that you were going to purchase 500 of this and change it now to 1,000. And it just takes a whole lot of extra time to do the project that way, to write the application that way. So phase one of the mentorship is plan. The objective there is to define a project worth funding. And I mean that as both that it's worth funding for you, that it's actually a project that's going to help your farm move forward. And it's a project that the USDA representative who reviews your application is going to look at and say, wow, this is something we want to invest in. This application really is like writing a mini business plan and presenting it to the USDA RD and saying, we have what it takes to pull this off and you should invest in us because look how this is going to pay off. You're not having to show them how you're going to, pay back their investment because they're not a private investor, but it's the same kind of process. So you really have to start with the project itself. So that includes understanding your cost of goods and knowing how this project is adding value, because you actually have to prove that. You have to show them in real numbers how processing your product or selling it as grass-fed or selling it as local is actually helping you add value. It also includes doing a sales analysis because you have to show your baseline of sales and then what your projected sales are going to be. There's market research involved because they want you to actually pull data, like back up those things with third-party data. And sales analysis. So sales analysis is more that baseline. And then the sales projections is over the course of this grant, how much are we going to sell? I didn't say this in the overview of the grant, but the timelines are 3 years, up to 3 years. So you're kind of showing a sales projection of whatever that timeline looks like for you. So I want to give you another real world example to kind of bring home this point. So this is another client that I worked with in the very beginning of writing this grant, Little Apple Treats. They're here in Sebastopol, California, and they sell apple cider caramels from apples that they grow on their historic orchard. They're amazingly delicious. And so they had a pretty good customer base. They were selling at one of the premier farmers markets in San Francisco, the Ferry Building Farmers Market. And when people would taste their product, they would definitely buy it because it's so good. But they had started to shift into some wholesale stores, and they wanted to do that because they wanted to start getting a little bit more quantity without them having to be there every time to sell it. So this may be something that you all have experienced. It's something that a lot of farmers do. When you are moving from in-person sales to sales in a store, it's a completely different experience because when people come up to the farmer's market, you do your spiel, you hand them a sample to taste, and then they decide to make the purchase. Now, when you're in a store, all of a sudden, your product has to do all that work for you. There's no one there to tell them the spiel. The package has to do that. So this is the beautiful packaging they had. But the problems they were dealing with were these are 3 different flavors, but they look so much alike. They had done that to make it cost less to run this packaging. But now that they were going into stores, buyers were only buying one flavor because why have 3 of the same looking thing on the shelf? Customers would come up and wouldn't, if there was more than one, they weren't really able to differentiate. It wasn't helping promote someone buying 2 instead of just 1. And while they did this packaging to cut down on their costs, this type of packaging, you can print a whole lot of the base and bring down the cost of the base and then just have these different sleeves that you put over. So it was cutting down the cost in that way. But if any of you have gotten this type of packaging, you would know that when you build those bases, it actually takes a lot of labor to sit there and you have to fold all these bases to make the base and then put the stuff in and then slide the thing over. So the labor of actually packaging this stuff was really, really high. So their sales were sluggish in wholesale, and their costs on the labor of this packaging were high. They wanted to move towards more differentiated design and a box that was already put together. But to do that, you need to buy, and to have it be, not $2 a box for the packaging, you have to buy in quantity. You have to buy 5,000, 10,000 units. And where does that money come from for a small farm? Most small farms don't have the money to put into that initial purchase. Well, where the money comes from is the value-added producer grant. They were able to cover design fees for this new packaging. Each one has its own separate design. The actual purchase of the packaging, other ingredient costs, sell sheet design, this beautiful professional photography. They reported back to me that the kind of holiday sales after doing all of this had doubled even in that first year, before they had even really gotten into the marketing of the product. And they've gotten now featured at Martha Stewart Living magazine, you can see here. And as Joanne says, the USDA value-added packaging grant that Ellen got for us was critical in improving our branding, leading to a huge jump in sales and the ability to be picked up by larger accounts such as Ely, Oliver's, and Buy Rate Markets. So definitely what they had wanted to do came true because of the grant. It gets to one of my big tips, which is knowing it's only value added if it adds value. So you do have to show, in that case, we were showing it's bringing down their costs, and they can actually, in their case, charge a little bit more for it. And definitely they were making way more on the caramels than they were if they were just selling the apples. So that was phase one, is coming up with the project that's worth funding. Then we get into phase two, which is collecting. You're going to have to collect quotes to quote out your budget, letters of commitment, and all the different documentation pieces. 32% of the grants, the USDA once reported, gets tossed out for just not being complete, for not having all the documents that they ask for. And you don't want to be on that pile. You don't want to have done all this work and then get tossed out because you forgot one thing that they ask for. Phase three is budgeting. So we actually build in the mentorship an eligible budget, with items that are eligible, but then also that works in real life, because you want your budget, you want to make sure when you're designing your budget that the way that you're going to be able to ask for those reimbursements is going to keep your cash flow moving. And they have a few different formats. So definitely make sure that you change the budget into all the formats they're looking for. In the mentorship, I have spreadsheets that help you do all that. They lay it out in the toolkit, but you just have to have a system for creating that for them. Phase four, writing. So I don't actually get to writing until I've done all of that. As you see, it's not number one, it's number four. And my biggest piece of advice is to use the toolkit. In the mentorship, I do a personal review of your application. And I only do that if you use the toolkit, because the toolkit really lays out the exact parts of every question that they want you to answer, and make sure that you do answer every bit of information they're asking for. If you scroll back up through the chat, you can see that Liz put the link to the USDA RD's website where the toolkit lives. Make sure it's a compelling narrative. Your reviewer has gone through so many applications. Each state has 2 reviewers that it has to go through before it gets to the federal level. How many have they read that day? How many have they read that week? Make sure you're really telling the story of your farm and really selling what this grant could mean for you. And make sure there's the way that things get funded is by a point system. So pay attention to that. That's what we designed the mentorship around, is to make sure you maximize your points. But if you're going to write it on your own, make sure you're looking at that and maximizing your points along the way. And then you get to submit. So there's a few confusing forms. that you have to fill out. And then you complete the application with all your appendices and attachments. In the toolkit, we have a whole checklist to help you through that. But yeah, just make sure all those pieces are in there because you don't want to be on that pile of applications that get thrown out for being incomplete. So I was just talking about the mentorship. I started it last year. And I kept it really small because I wanted to make sure it worked. My thought here was that my one-on-one grant writing fills up quickly. Right now it's filled except for California farmers. There's 3 spots open through a scholarship with CAF. If that's something you want more information about, you can email us. But otherwise, my grant writing spots are full. So I started the mentorship, which is basically me thinking, well, I didn't know how to write this the first time I did. I've learned a ton since then. Can I teach people how to write it themselves? And last year, all the participants who submitted a final application were funded, which was very, very exciting to see that they could get funded if I taught them how to do it. So this year, I'm really excited to launch the mentorship again. And we actually created a whole lot more awesome materials for anyone who wants to come and join us. The mentorship includes group calls. So we have a group call every other week where I go through what to be working on and like teach you this new section of the grant. There's Q&A that you have access to at all times for me to answer questions as you go through the process. I one-on-one actually review your application, the draft of your application, and give you specific feedback before you finalize it. There's a guidebook that breaks down every step of the process. And then there's all my spreadsheets, there's budget spreadsheets, support letter templates, research resources, an application archive so you can see real life examples of applications that have gotten funded, and then that preparation checklist to make sure you get everything in. I just want to show you real quick. I am just because I'm so excited about it. This is the awesome guidebook now that has like breaks everything down step by step for you. And the back end of the mentorship, you get into this dashboard and you can see there's like the different calls, but then we have every section and you have like a cost of goods workbook. If I was talking about that and you don't know what that is, we actually help you break down your cost of goods. We have competitor price comparison spreadsheets. So you can see, you can prove like, yes, my grass-fed beef is adding value versus if I was doing it conventionally. Research resources, all this stuff all lives in here for you to have access to. And in the calls, we actually have you present at points your different arguments so that I can give you that one-on-one feedback of how to change it so that it matches what they're looking for. So yeah, we are starting on this Friday, I believe, and Liz, correct me if I'm wrong. Everything is very quick this year because applications are due May 2nd and they just announced last week. So I know this is like, it feels like a crazy train, but we're just like, we're going to get it all done. We just have to start. So if you go to the website, if you want to join us in the mentorship, if you go to my website, you'll see this banner up here. You just click on that and it takes you to this page about the Value Added Producer Grant Mentorship. And you can sign up right here. There's a portal to pay. The max I'm taking this year is 10, and that's because of that one-on-one review. I need to have the time to really commit to doing that and to giving you a really in-depth review of your application. So you can see on here, it tells you how it works, what all the things that are included, and a little bit of a look inside the curriculum, the dates and the schedule. There's some frequently asked questions in here, and then there's a payment area. So if you want to pay in full, it's $900. And if you want to split it up into monthly payments, that's great too. And they're just 3 payments of $325. And basically, I just want to say a little note. that I do not love the whole concept of interest, because I think it is bad for the earth, because it requires us to have more resources than actually exist. The reason that there is that extra 25 is to cover the processing fees, because I end up having to pay 3 processing fees instead of 1. So I hope that that feels fair and just to you, because I never want to disadvantage someone that does not have the capital up front to pay for my services. So that I'm going to leave this up here so folks can see it. Feel free to actually jump over now. Like I said, we're going to start on Friday. So once those spots are full, we're just going to have to cut it off and move with the folks that are in there. And I'm really excited to run that mentorship again. It was really fun last year, and it was wonderful to see people get the funding for their projects. So if you have, I'll open it up to questions. We have another 10 minutes for you to ask questions about anything. If something else popped up about the grant, or if there's questions about the mentorship, feel free to stick them in the chat. And Liz put in here a link to sign up for the mentorship too, if that's sounding like a good supportive option for you. Awesome, we do have some more questions. Okay. Haley, if you get to it later. Oh, thank you so much. My question is that to sell beef directly, it must be labeled and inspected via a local butcher. None of our local butchers have computer programs to get our beef labeled with our specific farm-specific logo and contact info, just their own labels. Can we apply for grant with them in mind, because we cannot move forward without them moving forward? Thanks. Okay, I think I'm gonna be able to answer it and then add more detail if I'm kind of off track. Let me drink a little bit of water first. So you bring up a really great point, and I don't know if it's Hallie or Haley, so forgive me if I'm saying it wrong. When you apply for the grant, you kind of have to show that you have what it takes to pull off the project, because just think about it. If this was a private investor and you went to them with an investment proposal and you were like, look at this awesome thing we could do, but this would have to happen for us to do it, and this would have to happen, and this would have to happen, and then we could totally do this thing. Like, how many people are going to invest in that versus we have we have everything lined up. All we need is your investment, and then we can make this project go. That's more what they're looking for. So it's actually really good that you have local butchers that you could work with. So if that's part of your question, like, yes, because you don't have to be doing the processing yourself in order to get funded. So you would actually probably list those people, and you'd get letters from those people in your application to show that you have the support to pull off the project. Now, in terms of this like logo specific thing, I can't tell if you would be the person who would be applying. You wouldn't apply with them. You wouldn't like put in your budget a system, like something that you're buying for them, as in if they're the one who is going to buy it in the end, you can't then get reimbursed for it. But if it's something like, for example, I've worked with clients that they want to be certified organic, and all of their local processors aren't certified organic, so they can't make the final product certified organic. So they'll pay for the process to get that person certified organic. Like, they'll front the cost. So something like that. Now, not to confuse people too much, but getting certified organic is not an eligible expense in this. That was just an example of like, if you are buying something so that you can work with them, then yes, that would be something that's eligible. So I don't know if it's like this computer program, or if it's like your stock labels that have your logo on it that then they can like run through their system, those kinds of things. I hope that made sense. What's the timing on when we apply for the grant to the timing of when we get the funds? David, that is a very, very great question. So they say, so this year, grants, like I said, are due May 2nd. Funding, they say, is going to be announced September 30th. They're pretty good at getting funding announced when they say they will. Sometimes there's like a month lag. But basically what happens when you get that notice that you are funded, then you go back and forth with a little paperwork. You have to sign on the dotted line that these are the things you're agreeing to. So typically funds get moving in October, and then your timeline will be like, I recommend that you never do a timeline that's less than 2 years. So your timeline will be something like 2 to 3 years to spend the money. Now, if you do a 2-year timeline and you spend the money quicker, that's totally fine. You just do your final report and you finalize the grant. And then the next time the grant cycle comes around, you would be eligible to apply again. So that's something that's really awesome. When I was talking about the 50,000 or more than 50,000, you can apply for less than $50,000 in this funding cycle, and just know that the way that you write your application now, you should think about the strategy of then making sure that you could apply for another grant in the future so that you could get another $50,000 without that feasibility study. So that's something we go over in the mentorship, is how to strategize so that you can keep applying for more funding opportunities. Processor says it would take a $30,000 program, machines, et cetera, for them to be able to do custom labeling. Yeah, I mean, the machine and everything, I don't see why. Yeah, that gets into the specifics of them a little bit, but I'm just thinking depending on how stuff is, could the wrapping have your logo on it instead of the label? Could there be 2 labels, they label something and then you put a little medallion on? I know that's extra labor, but then your logo gets on there. I would maybe start thinking creatively about how you could work with them without that $30,000 and still get your logo in there, because there might be other ways that you can do that without that program. Will you elaborate on the match requirement, especially as it pertains to the non-cash portion? Is the non-cash match maximum 25%? Specifically, how much of our own salaries can be used as match? So your own salary is that 25% of the total project cost, which is 50% of your match. The other 50% of your match can be a combination of cash, in kind, and the value, cash, third party in kind, and the value of the raw commodity. So in the end, maybe you have, say it was you're asking for $49,999 to stay underneath that $50,000 threshold. Maybe in the end you have $5,000 in cash. I'm just going to make it $50,000 so I can actually think about it. You have $25,000 in kind. You have $5,000 in cash and $20,000 in the raw commodity value, for example. I was told you can apply your own labels as long as it does not cover up the USDA label. Great, Chantal, that's a good clarification. Forwarding a direct chat from Mitchell. I see on the website some inventory is allowed. Can I buy cows with the funds? No, nothing related to the buying, the farming part. Which cows, that part, I know they're not farming, but the raising of part. Does the spending have to happen after the grant is approved, or can it be spent after the grant was submitted before you know for sure you got it? Vicky, awesome question, because this is not consistent over even USDA programs. So it has to be after the grant was approved. So anything spent after October, if that's when basically it gets approved, and I should clarify that it gets approved, you get the funding. Then, like I said, you have to sign the documents. once the documents are signed, they send you a thing that's like, okay, your grant is live. And then from that date on, you can spend money and get it reimbursed. Mitchell, I answered that one. Jacob, what is the cost of having you write the grant if we're interested for future years? Thank you, Jacob. Yeah, so it's $6,500. So there is definitely a difference between that and the mentorship. This year, like I mentioned briefly, there's still 3 spots left for a scholarship through an organization called CAF. And that's only for California farmers. So if you are a California farmer and you're interested in that, you can email us and we'll give you the details. Scholarship applications for that are actually due tonight by midnight. Everything's happening so fast because of this shorter window. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to give you all more time on all of this. But yes, definitely. I mean, I basically, my spots start to fill up before I had 3 spots filled before the grant was even announced. So if it's something that you're interested in for next year, there's not really a time that's too early to start talking to me about writing your grant one-on-one. And I'm hoping, you know, as I grow that I'm able to take on more. It's just, yeah, I have only so many hours in the day and want to keep my pricing somewhat accessible for people too. Hallie, multiple labels look messy. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like there would be a way to do it that it doesn't look that messy. Like, yeah, like it's design. Like, I feel like a designer could figure that out, but you have to do something that you feel good about. Is fencing equipment farming? Yes. Anything related to growing, herding, all of it. You know, even if you're working with a co-packer, the delivery to the co-packer is not covered. The like shipping back from the co-packer is. So it's really the value added portion. What about the meat sealing equipment, like vac packaging? If it's less than $5,000, so like Chantal, the kinds of things that I've gotten funded under that equipment portion, again, you wouldn't want to have like 10 $5,000 equipment purchases, because then that would be like $50,000 worth of equipment. But I've gotten, for example, like a labeler, like an in-house labeler, so that people could, stuff that wasn't getting labeled at the co-packer, they could label themselves, or a better printer to print off the shipping labels to ship out their e-com orders, because shipping for e-com is covered by this. So if you have high shipping costs, you can get that stuff covered. Those kinds of things. So backpacking, a lot of those are on the cheaper side, so I wouldn't see why not. Hallie, the person's question, meat vac sealing equipment. This would still be the processor that would have to do this. Otherwise, you, the farmer, would be the one handling and processing the product, which is not allowed by farmer themselves and they are the right licensing. Yes, but I totally worked with people that like have an abattoir and a butcher and things, or that they are both the processor and the person raising the cattle. Sorry to ask the same question again, looking for further qualification. What is covered for grass-fed beef then? So your like the fees for slaughtering the animal, your fees for butchering the carcass, your, you know, whatever packaging it's packaged in, like if you're using like a butcher paper thing, or maybe you're using bags, whatever label that you put on there. Say, I don't know how you sell, but it could be like farmers market fees and, you know, a person to then be at the farmers market and sell for you, or maybe you're selling online. So it's like your website and your digital ads and the delivery driver who's doing home delivery. It could be billboard advertisements for the brand. It could be, it's really the buckets that I think through when I think about eligible costs are the processing. So all of the processing fees, any fees or in-house costs relating to processing, sales and marketing, whether that's personnel, collateral, campaigns, you know, local radio ads, local magazine ads, like whatever, all that sales and marketing stuff. admin. So whether that's like your QuickBooks or your web hosting or anything that's like admin wise needed to keep the project going, and utilities. So if that's like that you have on site, if you're doing some of the processing on site, it's actually paying the utility bill or, you know, the rental freezer or that kind of stuff. Oh yeah, and for chickens, there's a bit of a different rules. Okay. Chantal, at least in Oregon. Okay, you guys can talk about licensing and stuff. But yes, so that looks like all the questions. It's been just super, super, super my pleasure to have this hour with you. Like I said, I'm going to stop my share. I'm really, really, really passionate about this grant. I've seen it do wonderful things for my clients and really cover costs that there isn't a way to get covered otherwise. You know, you can get loans for equipment purchases, but actually finding money to put into the marketing and the sales and the packaging and all that stuff that's needed to do well in this market is almost impossible to find. So I hope that if this is something that looks good to you, that you do spend the time to apply for it. And if getting some support and working with someone who's done it many times before sounds like something that is going to help you actually get the application done, get it submitted, and then get funded, I'd love to welcome you into the mentorship. You can sign up anytime or email us if you have more questions. And with that, I'm going to end the 2022 Value Added Producer Grant Writing Tips webinar. Thank you all so much for coming. And I hope to hear from you, or I just wish you all the luck with your farm, your projects, and getting this grant funding. Thank you so much.